I recently watched and completely fell in love with the 2005 version of The Producers, so much so that I think 2 days later I watched the 1967 version. And this version is very well received. It's got 7.6 out of 10 on IMDb, which is really great. And it's one that I know a lot of people really like. And I have to say, I'm pleased I watched the second Producers film first. Because if I'd watched this one first, I might not have gone on to watch the 2005 version. It feels... I want to say, first of all, I enjoyed this film. But now that I've seen the 2005 version, which is much better, for very specific reasons. It's not just the vibe. I feel like the choreography is better, the editing is better, the songs are better. I'm not sure if they cut many songs out of this 60s version, but it felt like there were fewer musical numbers. Maybe they truncated some of them so they didn't last as long. I really didn't, I didn't keep a checklist of all of the songs. But the songs appeared fewer and far between. The pacing in the 60s version is much worse. Really much worse. And I kind of touched upon the pacing in the 2005 version as being alright. The 60s version really isn't very good at that. I'm being negative, but that's with a direct comparison to the 2005 version, where I can see a much better way to take the script, to take the play, and adapt it for film. It's done beautifully in the 2005 version. I would have really thoroughly enjoyed this had I seen it first, but obviously I knew how it could have been done better, so I was watching it thinking, well, you messed that bit up and there's a much better way to do that, etc, etc. But it's not fair to compare it directly, particularly as this came 40 years before, or thereabouts. Had I never seen the play before, I haven't seen it on stage, and this was my first look at the Producers, I think I would have still enjoyed it enough. This is basically a film about Leo Bloom, who is an accountant, who works alongside a Broadway producer called Max, and together they try and put on the worst play on Broadway so that it tanks after the first night, the show is cancelled, they don't have to pay back the investors, and they make potentially millions of dollars. And the play is primarily, or mostly, about them trying to find this awful play, which of course ends up being Springtime for Hitler, which is the play that they go on to put on in the film. Will this play be an absolute flop? Will they make their millions? Or will it go horribly wrong for them and horribly right for Broadway? I'm not going to say what happens, but I will say that I still really like the play choice. I think Springtime for Hitler is so catchy. The song, the titular song, I just absolutely love. It is obviously released in 2005, quite far away. This one being released in 1967. The Second World War would have still been kind of a sore spot for a lot of people. People who fought in the war when they were 20 would have been in their 40s, maybe 50s here. And I think it would have been a very different experience, whether they watched the film or saw the play. I think definitely in the 60s it would have been a very different kind of vibe. And I could say, in the film's defense, maybe that's why they spent very little time actually showing us the play and showing us the dancing Hitlers, when you compare that to the 2005 version, where much more time is spent on that. But it is very weird, because Mel Brooks as a director is absolutely fantastic, and I find it odd that the pacing here is just so off. But maybe that's what the stage play is like. Maybe... And it's weird though, because I feel like they missed out. They spent too much time with the old women. That's a problem that I had. That lasted far too long without being important or adding anything to the development of the narrative. You'll know which bits I mean if you've seen it. It sounds really ageist if you haven't, but it makes sense. But maybe that's in the stage version. If it is, maybe they can kind of trim that down a little bit. It's just odd that this one seemed to spend far too much time setting up the narrative, not enough time allowing us to enjoy the crux of the story. It's still really short. It's an hour and a half compared to the 2005 version's 2 hours. I feel like the other one's probably more akin to the actual length of the play. As I said, not that many musical numbers in this version compared to what I would have expected, or certainly they're shorter versions of the musical numbers, which again probably accounts for why this is a much shorter film. The choreography is... Well, the actual choreography, the steps themselves are pretty decent. They're pretty good. Very talented dancers. But there's this scene, and I don't know if I was just really overanalyzing this, but there's this scene where they're all marching during the Springtime for Hitler song. And I just felt like everybody was really out of sync with one another. And normally, I'm not a dancer. I don't have that background. Normally, I don't notice that kind of thing. But to me, it was just really blatantly obvious. But there were some elements of the choreography that I thought worked really well and were really enjoyable as well. There were certain characters who I thought were underdone. Lee Meredith plays Ulla. I thought she was really underperformed. Well, her performance was good, but the character itself was underused. I felt like they didn't really get to the point of that character or really involve her enough. I don't know how much of her scenes they cut or how much of her dialogue they cut. But again, comparing it to the 2005 version, which I'm just assuming is closer to the stage version, it felt like that character didn't really need to be there based on how little they used her. There were other characters that I thought just didn't come across very well because, again, they spent so much time setting it up with Max and the old women and, not really getting anywhere with the development of the narrative, that when we do get introduced to these other characters, you're looking at your watch thinking, well, there's only 25 minutes left of this film. How can they possibly do anything decent with these characters? And for a lot of it, they don't. So I'm sounding very pessimistic, and I guess when I think about it and talk about it, it is not, from a technical perspective, from a storytelling perspective, there are a lot of things that they could have done a lot better. But is this just the benefit of hindsight? I guess it is. Unless, again, stage play is like the 2005 version, and they've just badly adapted it. If you've seen it on stage, let me know. How does it compare? I would love to see it on stage, and, fingers crossed that does get to happen at some point. I will probably never watch the 1967 version again. I did not enjoy the experience, but had I seen it, I probably would have thought, yeah, that was alright, but I don't really care about seeing it on stage, and I'm not going to watch the 2005 version. That's a lie. John Barrowman and Matthew Broderick were in the 2005 version. I was always going to watch that at some point, but I'm glad I did it the other way on. If you haven't seen this, please watch the 2005 version first, and then give this a go. I'm not going to say that just because we have a fantastic cast and a fantastic director that this is a brilliant adaptation. I'm not going to pretend that it is. I know a lot of people will be like, well, you can't say that about Gene Wilder, who gave a fantastic performance. I'm not saying otherwise. And I can't say that about Mel Brooks, because actually, I can. And I don't like it. I don't like thinking that it's not very great. But again, benefit of hindsight, maybe. I'm not sure. It's not awful if you like musicals. Give it a watch after you've seen the stage version or the 2005 version. At least I've seen it, but probably definitely not one I'm going to be watching again.